have you ever wondered how billions can just disappear from a country's budget, and the people responsible almost never seem to face the music? Today, we're going to peel back the layers on systemic corruption in the Philippines. We're not just talking about the crime itself, but the architecture that's been built to make sure the powerful can get away with it. All right, first, let's get a handle on the sheer scale of this. We're talking about an estimated 20% of the entire national budget in the Philippines being lost to corruption. And that's not a one-time thing. That's every single year. Just think about that. 1/5 of all the money that should be going to schools, to hospitals, to roads, it just vanishes. And that really brings us to the absolute core question of this whole explainer. If the losses are this massive, this staggering, why does it always feel like the powerful rarely, if ever, face justice? The thing is, this isn't just a string of bad luck or a few bungled cases. It's by design. So to really get how this whole system works, we've got to dig a little deeper. We need to understand the nature of the problem itself. Because we're not just talking about a few bad apples here. This is something much, much more deep-rooted. A malady, really, that's been shaping the country for generations. And if you look at it from a global perspective, the numbers tell a pretty stark story. Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index. It gives the Philippines a score of just 33 out of 100. I mean, look at that. That's way below the Asia-Pacific average and the global average. It really paints a clear picture that this is a huge ongoing challenge.
And this all leads us to this really crucial concept, systemic corruption. What does that mean? Well, it means this isn't just about individual people being greedy. It's about a behavior that has become so embedded in the political and governance system that it's practically a part of it. That old saying in tech, it's not a bug, it's a feature. That's kind of what we're talking about.
Okay, so how does all this actually work on the ground? I mean, what does it look like day to day? To really understand this architecture of impunity, we first have to map out the different ways it happens. Yeah, corruption here really comes in a lot of different flavors. At the very top, you've got the grand scale stuff they call plunder. This is the systematic looting of billions, like the famous case of the Marcos family's wealth. Then you have graft, which is where you get those infamous ghost projects that never actually get built. And of course, you have the everyday stuff, right? The bribery and nepotism that just eats away at public trust from the ground up.
So where do you find these practices the most? Well, the biggest hotspots are usually in public works and infrastructure. Overpricing on contracts is a classic. And then there are the revenue agencies, like customs, which have always been plagued by smuggling. But here's the kicker, and this is so important for later. It's the corruption inside law enforcement and the judiciary that really provides the key, the get-out-of-jail-free card for everyone else.
All right, so let's say you've done it. You've stolen millions. Now what? You can't just deposit it into your local bank account, right? The next big challenge is hiding it. And this is the first pillar of what makes for a perfect cover-up. The really sophisticated, often international, ways they make dirty money look totally clean. And this brings us to the core idea from our source material. This idea that escaping justice, it's not an accident. It's not just a stroke of luck. It's the result of a system that has been carefully, deliberately constructed. They call it the architecture of impunity, and it is designed for one purpose: to protect the powerful. Let's walk through a real-world example to see how this works, the infamous pork barrel scam. Okay, so step 1, diversion. Public money was funneled into a totally fake NGO. Step 2, obfuscation, a fancy word for making it confusing. The money was pulled out in cash fast and split up. Step 3, laundering. Over $12 million was wired to U.S. bank accounts. And finally, step 4, spending. That money was used to buy things like a Ritz-Carlton condo and a Porsche. Public funds laundered into private luxury. It's a classic trail. That pork barrel scam used all the classic tools from the concealment playbook. We're talking shell corporations, bogus NGOs, and offshore accounts in places like the British Virgin Islands. And they even used false names, which is a trick straight out of the Marcos playbook. He famously used the alias William Saunders for his secret Swiss bank accounts. And none of this works, of course, without forged documents and people on the inside willing to look the other way. But hiding the money, that's only half the battle. The second pillar of this architecture of impunity, and you could argue it's the more important one, is how they exploit the weaknesses inside the justice system itself. This is how you design a case to collapse from the very beginning. So I want you to imagine this. A prosecutor has spent years building a case. They finally get to court. They present all of their evidence. And then, before the defense even has to say a word or present a single witness, they play their trump card. They file something called a demurrer to evidence. And what they're basically saying is, Your Honor, even if you believe every single thing the prosecution just said, it's still not legally strong enough for a conviction.
And here is the absolute knockout punch. If the judge agrees, if they grant that demurrer, it's game over. That's it. It's a full-blown acquittal. And because of the rules against double jeopardy, the prosecution can't appeal. It is a final, permanent escape hatch.
So that begs the question, right? Why is the evidence so often ruled too weak to begin with? Well, it turns out it's a perfect storm of systemic failures. A huge chunk of the problem, as you can see, starts with just plain weak investigations. Then you throw in these extreme delays. We're talking an average of 7 years for a case. And then you add a judiciary that might be compromised and, critically, a deeply flawed system for protecting the very people you need to make the case, the witnesses.
Look, whistleblowers are the absolute lifeblood of any big, complex corruption case. You need insiders to talk. And yet, the witness protection program in the Philippines is described as deeply flawed. Here's why. It's run by the Department of Justice. Think about that. That creates a massive conflict of interest when the witness needs protection to testify against, well, other powerful government officials. So with no real credible protection, who in their right mind would risk their life and their family's lives to come forward?
Okay, so we've spent some time taking apart this architecture of impunity. And yeah, it sounds pretty bleak, I get it. But the story does not end there. So now we're going to shift from just diagnosing the problem to looking at the solution. We're going to look at proven strategies that can, and in fact have, begun to dismantle this very system.
So, what's the most effective approach that the research points to? It's something called the sandwich strategy. And no, it has nothing to do with lunch. It's this idea that there's no single magic bullet. Instead, you have to apply pressure from 2 different directions at the exact same time.
Here's how this sandwich works. The top slice is all about institutional reform. That means fixing the laws, strengthening the courts, and making government itself more transparent from the inside out. But that's not enough. The bottom slice is citizen oversight. This is all about empowering people, investigative journalists, civil society groups, regular citizens, to act as external watchdogs. You absolutely need both for it to work. One without the other just falls apart.
And we're actually seeing this top-down reform happening. For instance, there's a new procurement law designed to bring transparency to all those shady government contracts. The Supreme Court has created its own integrity board to police its own ranks, which is huge. And prosecutors are getting specialized technical training so they can actually follow the money in these complex financial cases.
Now, for the bottom slice, this is where you really see citizen power come alive. And just think about the incredible impact this has had. Investigative reports from journalists have literally provided the evidence that led to a president's ouster. You've got citizen watch groups that are now partnering with government agencies to track projects on the ground. And in one city, Naga City, there's a people's council that gets a formal vote on city projects and the budget. I mean, that is real accountability from the ground up.
So what does all this lead to? A really powerful conclusion. While this architecture of impunity is incredibly well built and formidable, it is not invincible. A system built on impunity can, in fact, be dismantled by a system built on vigilance. And the 1986 People Power Revolution, which peacefully toppled an entire kleptocracy, is the ultimate proof of that. The challenge is immense, for sure, but it is not hopeless.
Because ultimately, the opposite of a system of impunity isn't just a new set of laws or another agency. It's an active, breathing system of vigilance. And that kind of leaves us with one final question to think about. Not just about the Philippines, but about anywhere. How is accountability, the simple power to ask questions and demand answers, protected in your community?
Rise up, rise high. Let your spirit take flight. Chase the stars, never back down from the fight. We're warriors inside.